President Obama gave that measured, temperate speech on Thursday, praising the heroism of police, even as he called for reforms in the wake of the police shootings of 2 African-American men. But hours later, after a gunman shot a dozen police officers in Dallas, some rushed to construct a narrative in which the president and nonviolent activists pushing for police reforms were responsible for the violence. Among the first was former Illinois Congressman and conservative radio host Joe Walsh, who tweeted, "This is now war. Watch out, Obama. Watch out, Black Lives Matter, punks. Real America is coming after you," unquote. Joining me now, national political strategist L. Joy Williams, Jamil Smith, senior national correspondent for MTV News, and Leon Wolf, managing editor for RedState.com. Thank you all for being here. And Leon, I'm going to start with you and first give you real kudos. It's not often that I get to retweet RedState.com, but you wrote really movingly and I think exceptionally on your perspective on what the breakdown in trust between communities of color and law enforcement means. Is this something that on the right is sort of a commonly held belief, or are you kind of an outlier on that issue?
Well, Joy, I've been, talking and writing about this for some time, but I do think that it's becoming a more common belief and understanding, and I think a large part of that is due to the increased prevalence and frequency with which people are taking these cell phone videos and really showing it to people. And I think that it's one thing for people who live in, white middle-class suburbia to hear stories about police brutality. But I think for a lot of years, people just didn't believe those stories because it was inconsistent with what their experience in dealing with the police was. I think seeing it on video happens so frequently, not only with the situation in Minnesota and Baton Rouge, but even, some of the other, less lethal videos that have come out of where black people are stopped by police for things like broken taillights. They end up getting tased and pulled out of their car for just things like, asking, why am I pulled over? Why am I being arrested? Those sorts of things, I think, have been really powerful in kind of driving home to people that maybe this is a problem that's a lot more pervasive than we have previously understood.
And yet I'm going to stay with you for just one moment and play you what Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick had to say, because he had a very different take to what you've been saying and what to folks at places like Reason.com have been saying about these issues. Let's take a listen to the Lieutenant Governor of Texas.
I do blame people on social media with their hatred towards police. I do blame former Black Lives Matter protests. Last night was peaceful, but others have not been, and we've heard the pigs in the blanket.
And Black Lives Matter has completely disavowed anything like these pigs in a blanket chants and things like that. But what do you make of this blaming Black Lives Matter, which is essentially advocating just what you said in your excellent piece for the violence against police?
Well, I do think that it's a little bit ridiculous. And as a conservative, I obviously don't agree with a lot of the rhetoric that you hear from people at the Black Lives Matter, protests and so on and so forth. But I think that there's so much polarization in this country on this issue. The people tend to fall into one of two camps, one of which says that everything that police do is wrong, and then there's one that says everything that police do is right. And I think that both of those are kind of contributors to this problem. The truth is, as I said in my piece, is somewhere in between. I think that probably the vast majority of interactions that people have with the police are professional and courteous and everything goes fine. But I do think that there are instances where those interactions go off the rails. I think that in some portion of those interactions, the police are at fault, and I do think that it's true that when that happens, in a disproportionate number of cases, police are not held accountable, and I think that's a problem.
And I'm going to come to the panel here at the table. I mean, Jamil, you do have this, thing that you're now hearing people have to articulate, that you can be really appalled by the assassination of police officers and also be really appalled when people get killed in a traffic stop by police. Why do you suppose that still has to be said?
Well, I think because largely the conservative message is that those two things are irreconcilable. I think, frankly, what we have on the conservative message every time something like this happens is messages like Joe Walsh and this other representative who they blame the activists and they blame the people who are actually trying to make things more peaceful. And we continually have to explain over and over again our reality, that this is a problem, that this was a problem long before anyone could take a cell phone video of it. And so if people had just simply believed black people and other people of color when they talked about this kind of harassment before, I think we'd be a lot further along. But we continually, every single time one of these things happen, we have to continue to explain ourselves and explain our reality.
And it's interesting because, Joy, the other thing that seems to happen reflexively is that President Obama gets blamed. He comes out, he tries to make a statement that brings the country together, and he gets a response like the one I'm going to play now from Texas Congressman Louie Gohmert.
This president has had a gift. He has had the opportunity to bring us together, to be the uniter, not the divider. And every time he's had the chance to bring us together as a nation, when I would look to him, okay, bring us together, he would say the most divisive things. He always comes out against the cops, but then he would usually be wrong. And this administration has supported Black Lives Matter, as even their leaders have called out for killing cops.
Now, I have to say that Louie Gohmert is also the guy who screamed at the top of his lungs at John Lewis and his other colleagues in the House during that sit-in. Just have to put that out there.
Yeah.
But what is it that you think somebody like Louie Gohmert wants President Obama to say?
I don't know what it is that they want him to say. Listen, the protests and the activism that we're doing is basically holding up a mirror to America and to those responsible and saying, look how ugly you look. And the response that the elected officials, that some conservatives have, they are responding to seeing their ugly faces being shined back on them. And so that is the response. So you want the president to make you feel good about the ugliness that's happening? That's impossible. You want the president to say something to make you feel better about that? That's impossible. And so, you know, obviously we don't, view the president's statements that way. And it's just amazing that there can just be these two different views. The president's not doing anything to make anybody divided. He is simply showing that there is a divided America.
Yeah, I wish we had more time, but I'm going to ask Leon Wolf, everybody check out his piece at redstate.com where he talks about this breakdown of social order. Would you write a post for me, Leon, about what you would want as a conservative to hear the president say that you think conservatives would be more open to? Would you be willing to do that? We'll bring you back on.
Sure, absolutely.
I am your editor.
I am go into that now, but I understand we're probably out of time.
Yeah, we are out of time. I am now the editor of redstate.com. Joy Williams, Jamil Smith, and Leon Wolf will be back. Oh, actually, Leon Wolf will be back later in the hour. I'll ask you next hour. Coming up next, the divide in our country displayed in one simple map. Stay with us.
We cannot, we must not vilify police officers. Remember what those officers were doing when they died. They were protecting a peaceful march. They were people in authority making sure their fellow citizens had the right to protest authority. And there is nothing more vital to our democracy than that. And they died for it.
Hillary Clinton yesterday during an appearance at the AME Church Conference in Philadelphia. In the aftermath of the Dallas police ambush, Clinton canceled a campaign event in Scranton, Pennsylvania with Vice President Joe Biden. Donald Trump followed suit, canceling a speech in Miami and releasing a video statement.
A brutal attack on our police force is an attack on our country and an attack on our families. We must stand in solidarity with law enforcement. We must remember is the force between civilization and total chaos. The deaths of Alton Sterling in Louisiana and Philando Castile in Minnesota also make clear how much more work we have to do to make every American feel that their safety is protected.
Joining me once again, Joy Williams, Jamil Smith, and Leon Wolf. And Leon, I'm going to come to you because I did ask you before we finished in the last segment, we ran out of time in the last hour, what you would want from a conservative point of view. What is it that conservatives want to hear the president say? And we'll start with President Obama. In times like these, when there is gun violence or an incident like Dallas, what is it conservatives want to hear?
Well, listen, Joy, I mean, I'm old enough to remember that back in 2007, 2008, liberals didn't want to hear anything from George W. Bush. He could have said the sky is blue and he would have been criticized for that. And I think there's probably that's the kind of point that conservatives have reached with President Obama. After a guy's been president for 7 or 8 years, the people on the other side of the ideological spectrum are just not really interested in hearing what he has to say. For myself personally, I didn't have a humongous problem with what the president said on Friday. I think that in fact, I thought a lot of it was pretty good. The only thing that I would say that I would be critical of was this kind of foray into the gun control issue, because I think if you look at what goes on in other countries, the prevalence of guns is not related to police killing their own citizens. I mean, the country of Iceland has had its own independence for about 50 years. They just last year, for the first time in their nation's history, first time ever, had a policeman kill a civilian. First time ever in the history of Iceland. Iceland has a very high incidence of gun ownership. Same thing in Sweden and Finland. They have a lot of guns in this country, almost as many as we have in America, and they don't have the same prevalence of law enforcement killing of civilians. So I think that is one of the things that kind of, set a lot of conservatives off about what the president said. But I thought, overall, his pitch was pretty good yesterday.
Yeah, I will say that, Australia had a direct experiment in this, and that they reduced the number of guns in their society, and they dramatically reduced the gun violence. And I think other countries have much stricter rules about the way the police can use their firearms. But that's a debate we can have. We want to move and talk about the current political candidates, and I want to bring the panel here at the desks in. Is there something, Jamil Smith, that Donald Trump could say or has said that Democrats would say, okay, I can concur with that?
I mean, I think his statement was actually, for him, uncommonly good. But that's not really saying much when you're talking about Donald Trump. I think, frankly, look, the one thing that Donald Trump needed to not do was to inflame the situation, which is normally what he does. So with that statement, yes, there were facts wrong. Yes, there was a lionization of the police, which we need to get, really stop doing. But I feel like, overall, he didn't make things worse. And I think that's really the most we can ask from him.
And, Hillary Clinton has this long history, Joy, that, people in New York know about that maybe the rest of the country doesn't, in speaking to these issues of gun violence, going back to the Amadou Diallo case, the Patrick Dorsman case, in which the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, was horrible. Let's just be frank.
And still
cruel.
is horrible.
And she called him out on his real cruelty to those victims on the side of, by throwing himself on the side of police releasing Patrick Dorsman's juvenile record, etc. So she has a history on this. Do you think that her history on this has actually helped her in a material way, or do you think it's something that she hasn't really, hasn't really sort of put forward for herself in her own defense?
Yeah, to your point, I think that's something that people in New York know. I think it has helped her in terms of helping her understand and being able to connect the issue. You've certainly seen a growth in her as a candidate in discussing this issue. She talked about criminal justice reform in the beginning of her campaign, and even her statements in the interviews I've seen in the past 48 hours that she has released or has done. There is the vocabulary and the context in which she is talking about it is different and more towards those of us who have been protesting and taking action on this. And that's, I think, is a kudos to the movement overall, in that they have shifted the conversation on that. And contributing to that is what we said earlier, where this need to say, we're not talking about all police, or we're, sort of the lionization of police departments.
You need that in order to just,
that this current movement is pushing against that. And that's what we need to do. No one is talking about the police. We all agree. I mean, I have, family members who are currently on the force that I want to see in the deacon row when I go to church every Sunday. Sure. So we know that the majority of them are going to do their jobs. What we're asking you to do is join us in rooting out the people who are not, and then holding the people accountable who are taking people's lives.
Yeah, and make it the climate such that officers who do want to come forward don't feel afraid themselves and don't feel intimidated. And Leon, you said we've reached this point where conservatives are just sort of tuning out whatever President Obama has to say. Project forward to if Hillary Clinton becomes president, because I think the conservatives reached that point with the Clintons 30 years ago, right? So that she's already at that point with the right. Are we simply to look forward to 4 more years of talking past each other on really every issue, but even in moments like these where, look, my family was not fans of Ronald Reagan, but when he did the Surly Bond of Earth speech after the Challenger, everybody listened to him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that this is an issue that really is not going to come from the Oval Office, kind of regardless of who it is. I mean, I think that's one of the limitations, really, of the power of the presidency. But I do think that there is a real sense, and it's growing on the right, that criminal justice reform is something that needs to be taken up by conservatives, that this is an issue that we need to deal with kind of regardless of who the president is or who's in power in federal government. I mean, it's a big government issue as well, and one of the things that I think gets swept under the rug under this whole discussion, especially if you look at the Ferguson DOJ report, one of the main things that they spent a lot of time talking about was the reason police come in contact with minority communities so often is that cities budget for things that they can't afford and turn the police departments into these armed revenue collectors to go out and essentially extract the hidden tax from the minority community. And, you know, that's not something that conservatives support, and I think a lot of people are opening their eyes to that, and I think that that's probably going to continue to occur kind of regardless of who is in the Oval Office. At least that's what I hope to be the case.
And I think that's a really good point, right? Because that's actually something that can be done, that's material that you can actually impact right now.
Yeah, and to Leon's point, a lot of this work has to be done on a state level and on a local level to change some of these laws and the policies overall that create this climate. But I don't want to miss that there is also there are lots of things on the federal level that can be done by both Congress and possibly leading from whoever is occupying the White House. I mean, just a simple thing that, you know, I've been talking about and pushing is the requirement for police departments to actually report the deaths of unarmed, of whether it's unarmed or deaths in custody in general, is a suggestion. It's not mandatory. And so what happens if you do not report this as law enforcement across the country, you lose federal funding.
Right.
You know, there are some things that can be done to hold, you know, to put more accountability measures in, to be able to collect the data, but then also to introduce clear, concise accountability measures to demonstrate to communities of color that we're really have an interest on preserving your life.
Yeah, and one of the great tragedies is that Dallas was doing that.
Right, exactly. They've employed the de-escalation techniques that the Obama administration recommended, and frankly, those same de-escalation techniques are not part of the Democratic platform as it stands. So I think, frankly, you know, we're hearing a lot of wonderful words, but you know, we need to actually do more than try to close the empathy gap. We need to actually see some policy and see what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, just don't talk at me. Do some stuff.
Do something. We'll put that on a bumper sticker. Joy Williams, Jamil Smith, and Leon Wolf, thank you all. You guys are great. Thank you. And up next, we take a look at what it means to be black and in the wrong place. Don't go away.